it's a mechanism for decision making and problem solving, which he's a psychotherapist, and he really does a lot of work on childhood trauma. And he points out that a lot of people aren't even capable of receiving feedback without getting defensive, and that causes problems, right? So he has this mechanism called amplification and soul bonding, and your group of 8 engages in this mechanism. And so instead of a dialogue, it's an octalogue with 8, right? But he has this really cool picture, maybe you can link to it, of the Holomat organization. There's all these groups of 8, and each time an octagon touches, there's an ethical contract amongst those groups. But he has the groups of 8 and the octalogues that have a function like law and food production and defense and so on and so forth. So we're in the very beginning stages of this, and I don't want it to be like John Bush has this idea of how it should be, or Bob Podolsky has this idea of how it should be, and it's got to be this way. I want it to be like, these are some foundational ideas. Let's take them and run with them and let people innovate and form it up and make it look however it needs to look, right? Because I don't know what the best way to form an alternative social organization, an anarchist society, is from the ground up. I have some ideas that I'd like to share with people, but maybe some people do it better.
I'm moving house today. It's been 2 years, 8 months and 28 days, and I've got to say that as I step off the bus for what could be the last time spent as sitting in your boss supermarket queues, etc. And I have to say though, it's only today that I'm glad to be leaving. I really will miss the when Santa
listening to truthconduit.com with Chris McMillan.
John Bush, I'm glad to see you again. Glad to have you on again. My name's Chris McMillan. This is another episode of Truth Conduit. This is my 31st episode. So last time we talked, I don't even think I edited our previous interview at all. I just slapped it on there, and it's rough and it's rough going. It's been a while. The last time we spoke, we talked about Kratom and your Kratom shop. Now, I want to mention that briefly, but today we're talking about solutions. We know the problem, and we know it's not the virus. So, John Bush, you are an activist down in Austin, and you're an entrepreneur. You've got your Kratom shop, and also, I mean, you've been busy. You've been around for years. You were the editor and producer at the Liberty Beat. You were Rise Up Radio, Brave New Books. You were running a bookstore for a while down there in Austin. Are you still at the Center for Natural Living as well, John?
I'm on the board. We haven't done a whole lot of activity. We did actually produce a docu-reality series about our visit to Chiran. We haven't put that out yet, but yes, still involved with that organization.
Yeah, cool. And also, you were former executive director at the Texans for Accountable Government. I mean, that alone. Yeah, cool. The current topic now is, we've got this attack on humanity, attack on freedom going on. And I asked you to have a chat today to talk about, because you've been very busy. There's a very viable solution going on out there with, Derek Groves started the Freedom Cells, and there's a lot of people getting involved with that. So I just thought we'll kind of go through that and talk about solutions. For anyone who has not heard of the Freedom Cells, can you just give the idea behind it, a brief introduction is what's going on with that, John?
Sure. So it was actually a concept that I formulated back in 2015 and gave some speeches and podcasts about it. And Derek Groves took it and popularized it and spread it all throughout his network. And around that time, I kind of took a step back from activism and focused on my family and my kids and entrepreneurship. And Derek is such a prolific writer and speaker, and he's all over the place. So I'm really grateful that it piqued his interest, and he took it and ran with it and spread it all over. But back in 2015, I guess really since 2009 and 2010, I've been interested in alternative institutions and agorism, direct action. I was a political activist for quite some time, and while we did have some minor victories, in reality, we weren't really creating more freedom. More so, we were slowing the growth of government and tyranny, but we weren't rolling it back by any means. We were just putting, some wrenches in the gears a little bit. And that wasn't satisfying for me. I wanted a path, and it's not an easy path, but I wanted a more direct path, a more viable solution to create the freedom that we all want. And I was kicking around some stuff in my head, and this concept of small groups and small mutual aid groups just was really resonating with me. And honestly, there was like a little bit of nervousness at the time because I thought that it'd be such a radical idea, and the name Freedom Cells might catch some negative attention from the government. But then I started hearing the small group idea multiple places, like Bob Podolsky. I was exposed to his book Flourish, where he talks about octalogs, which we can talk a lot about. They influence the Freedom Cells a whole lot. And then I went to this conference in Minnesota put on by some agorists up there. And this guy that is really involved with them, Nick Ludwig, he actually wrote this little 15-page pamphlet on small groups and how they've been beneficial throughout history and how they use that for their Ron Paul movement up there. And then Stuart Rhodes with the Oath Keepers, they had switched their strategies to focus on small county groups instead of the whole national organization. And I was like, man, this small group thing's an idea whose time has come. So I started putting it down on paper, gave some speeches, did some podcasts. And then, like I said, Derek Rose took it and it just grew from there. It really was an idea whose time has come. So the whole foundation of Freedom Cell Network are small groups of around 8 people. Could be 7, could be 9, could be 10, that we call the inner cadre. And you link up with these people, your most trusted friends, family, associates, ideally, and you work together on common goals, and you support one another through mutual aid, and you work to help one another secure your sovereignty, your freedom, and your autonomy. And it doesn't just stop there. So we can talk about what some of these goals can be also. Once you have your little group, and it could be 4 people if there's not a lot of stuff going on in your town or you don't know a whole lot of people, right? It's not a top-down thing. There's not rules per se. It's just an idea that we want people to take on and make their own and link up with us as how we're doing it. So you have your group of 8. Then you encourage those members in your group of 8 to encourage other people to form groups of 8 that we call the inner cadre. And then when you have around 8 groups of 8, you link up and form what we call a middle cadre. Now you have 64 people. Now these 64 people aren't as dedicated to one another as the inner cadre. However, they are supporting one another, contributing financially, defense, whatever, meetings, skill share. Then you start spreading the idea regionally. So ideally the inner cadre is super local. Doesn't even have to be in the same geographic area. It can be like a virtual thing. That's locally. Then your middle cadre is regionally, and then the meta cadre, where you have 8 groups of 64, which is now like 512 people, can spread throughout a region or a state or whatever. It's all, we want it to be organic, so I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But we already have over 2,000 people. Last I checked, 2,077 that are registered on the website freedomcells.org. freedomcells.org, where we have a social network and a member map, and you can build a cell and people can find that cell. There's events listings, and there's a whole lot of activity going on. And the idea really is spreading like wildfire. So it's super cool. Back in 2015, it was just an idea. It was a podcast and some speeches I gave. And then in large part, thanks to the work of Derek Brose, he started promoting it and pushing it out, and it really caught on. And now with all of the COVID stuff taking place, and the escalation of the technocratic state and control and the Illuminati, New World Order, all this terrible stuff that's taking place, it's really hot right now because people are desperate for solutions. And I think we're onto something with this one.
And the Freedom Cells are spread out. I mean, this is a worldwide, there's members all over the world. Is that right? Like in every country.
That's right. Freedomcells.org, there's a member map where people can register on the site and then put their address, or like, convenience store down the road or whatever, if you don't want to put your exact address on the site. And there's people in Australia, South Africa, South America. The highest concentration is in Western Europe and the United States of America. A bunch of people in Australia as well. But it's a global movement, and there's people hosting meetups and people that are organizing. And one of the things that I want to do to help the movement is to help get more organized, because not everyone's utilizing a lot of people have their inner cadre groups, and then they're like hosting meetups in their area, like Dallas Fort Worth, for example. But we haven't really built out that infrastructure, that organization that I think could really be beneficial. We can get into some of the ways that this could help carry out common goals of a big group. And again, the goal on the small scale is to provide mutual aid and support and to enhance one another's lives and to protect our freedom and to assert our freedom and sovereignty. The big goal is to grow this network to the point where we have strength in numbers and we could essentially opt out of the technocratic state and put up an effective means of defense should the state try to crack down on us. Or maybe there's no crackdown. Maybe we can do a peaceful exiting. We have ambassadors and we negotiate with the state and we're like, we got 10,000 people and we're all prepared to not participate in this, this, and this. We still will engage with you in these particular areas, but we're ready to do this and we're ready to do this really soon. So let's make sure that we can have this peaceful exit without any problems, because we're peaceful people. Although we are really heavily armed, we don't want to use our firearms. We just want to raise our families, do our businesses, and no longer participate in a system that we find to be unethical and frankly not useful to us anymore.
Let's talk about two financial points. There's mutual credit, and then there's just flat out alternative currencies. Now, I read there's a city in Washington State. I'm not sure if it's a city or a county. They're actually printing their own currency, but I'm not sure about the legality of actually doing that. I'm kind of throwing two questions at you at the same time. Is an alternative currency altogether possible? And what about mutual aid? How does that work? Are these kind of solutions that are being talked about in the Freedom Cells networks?
Yeah, everybody's interested in money and currency and finance. And in fact, we did our fourth international conference call recently on Zoom. Must have been about 4 days ago. And this guy in California, something really spoke to me. I did a YouTube video about it on the Conscious Resistance Network YouTube channel. And he said, I'm from California and I'm mainly interested in Freedom Cells for economic purposes. I'm concerned that if I don't have my COVID pass, immunity passport, or I haven't taken the vaccine, I'm not going to be allowed into the grocery store. So I want to have a network and infrastructure in place where I'm linked up with my fellow human beings. I'm linked up with farmers, community gardens, so on and so forth. And that was really like, I knew that was a huge part of this, but it really just kind of made it real for me that here we are. I've been an activist for 20 years and I've been studying the growth of this totalitarian dictatorship, on a global scale, and especially in Austin and Texas and the United States. And just, it's become so much more real what the agenda that's being carried out. And the Real ID Act is now fully in place. And now there's like coin shortages and everyone's afraid to touch money. So we see that they're eliminating cash. So it's a very real possibility that, in fact, this is already happening. If you weren't Real ID compliant, then you can't fly. You can't enter federal buildings. I don't know why anyone would enter a federal building anyway, unless you're coerced to go in. And now we have this immunity thing with the COVID element being added to it. It's even more likely. So it's possible that they could switch off your ability to conduct commerce, switch off your ability to travel out of the state. That's happening too. If you live in Texas, where I live, which is a supposed hotbed, you can't go to New York and other states that are already calming a little bit.
Why would anyone want to go to New York?
Yeah, that's right. It's bad news up there, unfortunately. But as far as alternative currencies, yeah, so it wouldn't be the Freedom Cell Network is talking about alternative currencies, and it would be very viable, and we ought to start building and trading with our own alternative currencies, cryptocurrency, for example, or something more grassroots. There are communities like Ithaca in New York. They do the Ithaca Hour. There's already a lot of those, and they're more left-leaning, progressive types, the good type of left-leaning folks that are like into gardening and natural health and homeschooling their kids kind of deal. Then there's like the big government, big corporate progressive types. But these smaller guys, I don't agree with their economics because a lot of them it's like an hour for hour trade. So you do an hour worth of labor and you can use an hour note, and then, or you could do an hour worth of labor for someone and they give you hour notes. But the thing is, like, if you're a carpenter that's been a carpenter for 30 years, your hour is more valuable than a carpenter that's still an apprentice, for an example. But by all means, if people are cool with that, or if there's a way to base your hours or more, or the person can choose however much they want to charge, then that's all, by all means, that's great. But there's a lot of ways that utilizing the Freedom Cell Network, we can engage in these mutual credit organizations so we can opt out of the banks. I personally don't have health insurance. I do a health share. It's very similar to health insurance. So every month I pay like $205. And if I'm in, and this is an emergency thing, because I visit naturopaths and I don't go to the doctor really very often at all. Like literally just less than a handful of times in the past 15 years or so. And if there's an accident, God forbid, like a bad car accident or something, the health share will cover everything over $1,000. So I have a minor thing or whatever, it's $500. I got to come out of pocket. But if there's like a $25,000 bill, then I just pay $1,000. They cover everything else. There's no reason why when our Freedom Cell Network grows to 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, we can't create our own Freedom Cell health share just the same, or our own lending credit thing to help incubate businesses within the network, especially businesses that will cater to the network, so to speak. So it's really a viable opportunity. And the way that this infrastructure, this peer-to-peer, decentralized, horizontal social organization of the 8, and then 8 groups of 8, and then 8 groups of 64, and then 8 groups of 512, which is over 4,000 people, can work, and how this network can use the consensus process to make decisions on spending money or creating the health share or whatever. It's super viable, and I'm really excited that we're going to get to experiment with this over the next 5-10 years and see how it turns out.
It is exciting. Two thoughts that, as you were talking, that came to me. The difference between anarcho-leftists and anarcho-capitalists really comes down to just property rights. But it made me think as well, there are other slightly differences like what you mentioned. I thought that was interesting. How do you distribute the time sharing and the mutual aid? But these are, as long as you've got groups that understand that all actions are voluntary, I think all these solutions can be worked out. That was a very interesting point you made. And the health share thing, that's really interesting. I've often talked about that with my wife, like alternatives to insurance. Is this there are a lot of groups out there doing that? The health share, what would you call it? Cooperatives like that?
Yep, there are a lot of them, and they really took prominence after the Obamacare stuff when healthcare got really expensive and there's all these issues. And a lot of them are religious, Christian-based, and they make you sign an affidavit basically saying that you're a Christian. I'm not a Christian, although I really appreciate Jesus Christ and his teachings and everything. And I like real Christians. They're good people oftentimes, but there's also a lot of, fake Christians that are Christians in name only, so to speak. I forget who it was that was like, I really like Jesus, but I don't like the people that follow him or something like that. I forgot who said that. But, they make you you have to agree that you go to church at least once a week and that you pray and that you read the Bible, stuff like that. So it's low barrier to entry for some people that maybe even are interested in that. Or I guess some people could be dishonest, but I think that would be unethical to do that. But I found a secular one called Zion Health Share. And it's got, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of members, and it's legit. It has good reviews. Some of them don't have good reviews. Like there's one called Liberty Health Share, for example. But I did quite a bit of research, and it's a real thing, and it's legit. And they're not considered health insurance, so they're not regulated like health insurance companies are, which is a whole nightmare. And they have more freedom, and it's a very viable alternative institution that already exists. And it doesn't even have to be that the Freedom Cell Network has their own health share, although that would be cool because it could be based on natural stuff. But the Freedom Cell Network could be like, okay, we're all going to participate within this health share or whatever, or we're going to have a resource where we list out all the really good opportunities that have been vetted, that are legit, that are authentic, that aren't unethical, and we just share those with the member and stuff.
That is really interesting. I'm glad I asked you about that, because I've always said, like a universal healthcare system seems like a good idea, doesn't it? But then the fact that, we are coerced under the threat of violence to pay into it, and that makes it immoral, unethical. And from, I lived in Europe and I saw some pretty crappy healthcare systems over there. And so, yeah, I mean, and especially if you come from a freedom-minded point of view and you understand that all action should be voluntary, that pretty much eliminates any government involvement at all. Because, as you know, John, I'm just kind of repeating this for any audience members listening who, I'm just kind of getting that idea out there. I mean, as long as you are coerced to pay taxes, it's violence. It's violence. You choose to not pay your taxes, you end up in a box. And so we're not really ever truly free as long as this system is not voluntary. What about skill sharing? I mean, and for example, if you live near enough to your Freedom Cells group, I mean, even skill sharing and speaking of alternative currencies as well, physical trading. I mean, there's absolutely nothing anybody can do if I trade my dozen eggs for your kombucha. Nothing. I mean, and what I see going forward is a combination of all of the solutions that we've just mentioned. There isn't going to be one solution. It's going to be a mix. And it's going to be trial and error as well. Any thoughts on that? How's it going with the Freedom Cell experience that you've been forming right now so far on that front?
When it comes to skill shares, we whenever you sign up for the website, freedomcells.org, you enter your name and a picture and a little bio, and then you put what skills that you have. And that's a lot of what the emphasis is. So you get in your group of 8, and some of you guys are good at carpentry. Some of y'all are good at growing food. One guy's like into herbalism or whatever. And then when you link up with the other groups of 8, you guys can host Skillshare and kind of diffuse and spread the knowledge. So if one person falls off or one cell exits the group, then you still have that information shared. And so as far as, like I was saying earlier, like I kind of took a step back from a lot of activism and producing videos and organizing for a while. I had 2 kids, they're 7 and 8 now, and we lived in poverty for a while because I was trying to be, like a libertarian purist and entrepreneur. I've been self-employed since 2009, and for a big bulk of that time, it was, pretty rough. So I really wanted to focus on entrepreneurship and getting out of poverty and having a little more financial success. And I think I reached that point. Still on, I'm still hoping that rocket will reach the moon,
Oh, John, don't get me started on getting you into autonomy. We've been trying for a while now.
I know. And I have a customer that always bangs on me too. He calls me to place orders. We chit chat and stuff. So I'm going to do that. I've been watching some of the videos the other day too. When I sit down and eat breakfast at an open restaurant, I like to watch some of the videos that come out.
We're working with Bob Podolsky as well over there in Autonomy. You mentioned.
Yeah, he's good. Yeah, he does a lot of good work. So as far as the Freedom Cells, I'm really trying to organize the Texas Freedom Cell Network because it's so much better to inspire people when it's not just an abstract idea, which it was totally abstract idea in 2015. Now we have a bunch of people that are participating, that are working, that are helping one another, that are linking up, that are building community. But I really want to have a proof of concept that has this network built out and stuff. So that's what I've been leaning into a lot too, helping to organize the Texas Freedom Cell Network. And as far as my cell, I have an unofficial cell, which is me, my girlfriend, my former roommate, and then my parents. And they're not, my dad's pretty hardcore. He used to work with me at the bookstore, and I think that radicalized him a bit. But I've been banging on him with 9/11 Truth for 20 years too. And he's finally come around. Actually came around, 10 years ago or so. So that's our little cell that we have, and we have a little text message chat, and we've really been talking a lot about preparedness and how to navigate this COVID stuff. And then I'm working on organizing more people in Central Texas, and organically there's already a bunch of people in Dallas, and of course there's a bunch of people in Houston because that's where Derek Rose is from. And so one thing that I want to do, again, is a proof of concept, is to more legit style, more official but unofficial, link up the people in Dallas, Fort Worth, us here in Austin, the folks in Houston and form that little middle cadre and start working, sharing ideas, funding, whatever, defense amongst ourselves as well. And then when I'm giving speeches or doing videos, it can be like, yeah, we hosted our third meetup, our third summit for Texas, and we did this, that, and the other. This guy's son broke his leg, and we were able to crowdsource hospital bill or whatever.
Everything is perfectly legal. It's just a group of like-minded people who understand the bigger threats that's actually going on out there, because it seems like the majority of the population still just don't get it. And creating these trade networks, I'm loving it. I was going to comment, another solution that has come up is, you get a Freedom Cell, a family that's got quite a few acreage, and to get someone else to come and park their trailer on there and contribute, whatever deal that can be made, it doesn't matter. And you build strength that way as well. That's always another possibility. Creating what I call trade routes, where we list like all the skills we have, that things that we produce. Like, what do you produce? How do you add value? How do you create value? By producing. So people with land are growing, raising, making whatever they can. And so it starts with your inner circle. You trade. Okay, John, you need some eggs? No, I don't need any eggs. But, then go to the next, you go outwards, and then you go to the local shop, support the local economy. Don't get it there. Then you go, and then you just extend outward. But everybody needs to economically, from that point, just go either make it yourself, can't do that, trade, or do a deal with your neighbor or your Freedom Cell, and outward like that. And that's what we're working on right now. In fact, this afternoon, I'm looking forward to it. I'm meeting with some friends, some of them, this afternoon out in East Texas. And we're going to talk about these very topics.
Awesome.
We're making things happen. But yeah, you've got to add value, whether it's producing something or creating or a service or a skill, all of these things, because we're at a point now where everybody needs to be a generalist. We've got to start increasing our skills across the board. It's something that we talk about a lot in autonomy, and our buddy Jack Spirko, he talks a lot about how important that is to become just a kind of across the board generalist. The more skills you have, never has this been more important than right now. The days of I've got a degree in this and I'm going to have a job in this for the next 30 years till I retire is gone. That is gone. People going to college right now who think that's the way it works are going to be in for a nasty surprise. I'm just kind of rambling on here, John. I'm not really throwing a question at you. I'm just kind of throwing back my feedback in response to what you said. I'm really glad we've had this chat, because I'm sitting here taking notes, even though, of course, I'll go back through it when I do the editing.
But first I wanted to speak to something that you brought up as far as the having property and people coming together. And, of course, the skills. I appreciate the whole generalist thing, and I wanted to lean more into that throughout my life, having at least a base level knowledge. It's especially beneficial. For example, when I was younger, I didn't really know much about cars at all, and would take my car to the shop, and you're just hoping, I hope they're not taking advantage of me, right? But then as I became aware of that, learned more about cars, started trying to work on the car myself. Then when we had the converted school bus, and all of a sudden I'm driving this 4-ton school bus all around 400 feet, and it has a big diesel T444E engine, and we'd get stranded on the side of the road, and I'd have to tinker with this big diesel engine. That really taught me a lot. But it's good to have a base level knowledge, so whenever you get the advice of an expert, you can tell if they are a good expert or if they're taking you along for a ride. And that's exactly what we can do through skill sharing and the Freedom Cell network. And you can have experts and tradesmen that you can go to, that you can trust, and that they're part of the network, they've been vetted, so on and so forth. But one of the bigger picture things that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and I know a whole lot of people have been wanting to do, is the idea of living on an intentional community in community. And it's been a desire of all the unschool people that I'm involved with, the granola moms that I'm involved with, the radical anarchist types, and just the homesteaders and gardenists and the survivalists. And so we can utilize the Freedom Cell Network in order to encourage this. And one thing that I'm doing is going to start saving up for the next year and a half or so, go in with a few people to buy a plot of land here just east of Boston. And we want to have our own homestead, off in the back corner, but then we want to convert a couple acres or however much property to have tiny homes or RVs that come park. And there's people in the Dallas Freedom Cell Network, this woman named April, that's already has a plot of land, and they're using the network to invite people to come stay out there and maybe do like a work trade kind of deal. But one thing that I envision is properties throughout Texas, for example, just our region, but this can spread throughout the country and throughout the globe. And you have this property that has 8 people or more, if it's a bigger property, and then you link up with the other properties and you form essentially a confederation of intentional communities. They trade amongst one another, they support one another, they defend one another, and they cooperate amongst themselves. And there's no reason why we can't, if we just keep at this, and again, it's going to take time, but if we're not just caught in the election cycle, like a reactive paradigm where, it's the third year and we got to start campaigning for this guy, or even like Libertarian Party politics, like we got to make sure we get ballot access and we got to go knock on doors, so on and so forth. That's just this reactionary short-term vision. And we all know, I see tragedy and hope there behind you, that the enemies of liberty have taken a generational approach towards their program to carry out totalitarian one world government, right? So we ought to think in terms of bigger picture, multi-generational approach, the price of liberty's eternal vigilance, and really start gearing towards the creation of these alternative means of social organization. I don't even like to say alternative means of governance, because govern means to rule over. Alternative means of social cooperation. And there's a lot of work going on in seasteads, for example. There's work going on in special economic zones, free private city, which is like a business that runs the city. There are corporations in the modern world which have their own problems, but it's certainly better than a city government. And then intentional communities where. And then we got to really think about how can we assert our autonomy, our political autonomy and sovereignty. And it's going to be very challenging. And that's where I think the strength in numbers comes into play. So fast forward 10 years now, and the Freedom Cell Network in Texas has grown to 30,000 people, which isn't far-fetched. We're already at 2,077, and that's mainly just the work of Derek Bros and then word of mouth from there, right? If we have big names and yourself and Bob Podolsky and the Autonomy Network and other people and James Corbett interviews Derek Bros, and we have a huge burst of interest then. Fast forward, we got 30,000 people. We have these properties over here, a bunch of people populated this small county out in East Texas or whatever. There's literally 6,000 people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that are all on the same page. And then we utilize our consensus mechanisms in order to reach common decisions amongst the whole network of 30,000. And we're like, this is the day that we're going to declare independence, or we have nominated this person to serve as an ambassador. They're in negotiations with representatives from the state legislature that, maybe we don't have to have 100% sovereignty, which is pretty far-fetched in the state of Texas. That's where seasteading has value. But it's like we want to not – it's like there's this concept of non-territorial governance where you can – and this is something I was formulating. I read it in a paper the other day in the Journal of Special Jurisdictions or something like that. And it was like you have a la carte government, where you don't utilize all of the services of government. But for example, maybe part of the negotiation is we're still going to pay the gasoline tax because we're still going to use Her Majesty's roads. But we have our own mechanisms of defense. We're all armed. We have our own private security in these neighborhoods. This county, we're close with the sheriff's department or whatever. I don't know. But we no longer want to use municipal police. We no longer want to contribute to Health Human Services. We no longer want to fund the debt of Texas or whatever. I don't know. And so an agreement is reached, but it's like we got to have leverage too, strength in numbers. And it's like we want to do this amicably. We want to come to the table with the government in order to negotiate the peaceful separation of our community and your government. But at the end of the day, we're going to do this anyway. We just want to work with you to make sure that it's orderly and peaceful. because we are free human beings, and this is our destiny to live as free human beings, and we're going to opt out. So let's figure out a way to make it so you can save some face maybe, and we don't have to have bloodshed. I don't know.
What about also unincorporated communities as well? You mentioned seasteading and the special economic zones. I know there's quite a few small unincorporated communities in Texas still. Are there actually any advantages to buying land in one of these areas as opposed to within the city limits?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's advantages to buying land in a smaller, more rural, more conservative county as opposed to a more city-based Democrat county. Of course, as anarchists and voluntarists, we don't buy the left-right paradigm, but I think it's pretty undisputable that Democrats and more left-leaning people are more willing to control your life and your business and the way that you build a home on your property than the conservatives. That's not 100% blanket statement, however. So if you're in the city, there's going to be more regulations than if you're just in the county. If you're in a more conservative small county like Bastrop compared to Travis County, for example, there's going to be fewer regulations. And then the further you get away from the small cities or the big cities, the more freedom there is regulatory style as far as building an alternative form of a township or whatever. However, there's people that want to come and do like a take over the county network, which I'm not 100% a fan of, because unless you have significant numbers, even if you have a whole lot of numbers, there's always going to be a good old boy network that's literally been ingrained in the area for generations. And so now you have these new rabble rousers and young people. You really got to come in from a posture of cooperation and how can we add value to the community and to the existing people. And like, we're not crazy, we're contributing, we're successful. And one of the things that the paper that I read recently was about barrier entries to competitive governance. It might be the Journal of Competitive Governance. And it talked about institutional inertia and problems that slow down the creation of special economic zones, non-territorial governments, and seasteads. And it said that you have to be able to add value in some way. So one of the negotiations could be like the special economic zones and free private cities. They want to use a corporation to have a city where you sign a contract and it's not changing. There's not politicians that get elected. You sign the contract and then the government service provider is beholden to the stakeholders and the community members and the board of trustees, essentially. That would be all the people that are involved. But one of the negotiations for the country of Honduras, for example, where they're trying to do this, is we're going to give you a portion of the money that comes out of the businesses or something like that, right? So ideally, it's just 100% freedom and autonomy. But if you're going to do it with an existing territorial government that is really, powerful and wants to hold on to some semblance of control, there's got to be a way to make it mutually beneficial. And then also, if you're like out in the middle of nowhere and you're just building your community, there's a lot of stuff you could do under the radar, counter economic style, right? But as it grows and progresses, there's always that tension between living small and being 100% agorist and like making multi-million dollars, or trying to reach like an Elon Musk billionaire status so you can like really make some big changes in the world with your hundreds of millions of dollars here and financing this project there, so on and so forth. There's that tension. And some people can do this down here. Some people can go for the riches up here. But as you go for the riches, as you expand, as you have industry you want to work in your freedom cell or your little jurisdiction, then it's going to get even harder with the existing governmental structures. But that's why we need to start laying the groundwork now. We need to start doing the theorizing now. And there's already a lot of people doing this. Like Michael Strong from Austin, Texas, was working with the government in Honduras to do this. They actually set up a seastead outside of the jurisdiction, territorial waters of Thailand, but Thailand got all butthurt about it and ended up charging the two people with treason. And now they have death charges against them. So they're in hiding. It's nuts. But that's why the strength in numbers comes into play, and the political influence. And it's not like outsider, rabble rouser, crazy anarchist. It's like productive human beings that are respectful and cordial with our other fellow human beings. And we're networked, and there's some of us that are, total outside agitators, but there's some of us that are ingrained in the existing institution and have good favor, even good political favor with the existing institution. But again, we got to adopt that bigger picture generational thing and not just think that we can just go secede in the state of Texas, for example, but let's like, what do we do to lay the groundwork? And I think one of the biggest things that we can do is network with like-minded people and grow our numbers, not a political party like the Libertarian Party. Wow, we have this membership and we raised this much money this year. That's not going to change anything. That's still stuck in the old framework. But how can we get outside of the box thinkers, forward thinkers that are ready to genuinely change the way that humans engage in social organization? And let's go ahead and start laying the framework now. So 10, 20, 60, 100 years from now, it becomes a very real, viable opportunity to create the alternative that we all are dreaming of and talking about and theorizing about.
I'm feeling optimistic, John. A lot of solutions out there, more than I realize. I'm really glad I got you on today. The solutions out there there are so many. If people can just, and we haven't even talked about the tech side. We didn't have time to go into that, but then there's a lot of talk of the tech side of alternative solutions to avoiding the contact tracers and avoiding the surveillance that's coming down the pipeline for all of us as well. Not to be the girl you mentioned earlier, April. That's who I'm meeting up with later.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah. She's part of my freedom cell, basically. we're, and I told them, I said, yeah, I'm going to talk to John this morning. So I won't have the video out till earlier next week, maybe Monday or Tuesday, but I'll let them know. That's why I'm taking notes, because they'll be like, what did he say? So I won't go, let me go back. No. Cool, John. What else? Anything else?
No, just I'd strongly encourage people to join the Freedom Cell Network. We built our own little alternative social network for people that are tired of the Facebook arguments and all that stuff. It's a productive place. There is, conversations and sharing articles and stuff, but really the focus and the emphasis is on organizing and finding people of like mind. So that's freedomcells.org. We also have an encrypted Telegram chat, and then we have a Facebook group too for people that are still into Facebook. I still use Facebook because it's where so many people are. We're also encouraging people to go to these alternative channels. And then I have some links I can share with you for the encrypted chat and for the Texas network as well. I know you're in Texas, so maybe we can help grow that network together. And if you share those links whenever you publish this, that'd be awesome. And then just some things that people can do to get started. If you're into the Freedom Cell idea, the first step would be to go to freedomcells.org and sign up and try to find people in your area. The next step would be to start finding people to form your inner cadre. Ideally, you know enough people where you could form a group of 8. Ideally, you know enough people where you could form a group of 8, and then you could help others to form a group of 8 and another group of 8. That'd be awesome. Some people are like that in big cities that are networked and go to the meetups and voluntarists, or even people that are in the Libertarian Party, for example, or they have their little survivalist group or whatever. And then from there, set common goals with your Freedom Cell. Some starter ones, this is what we always throw out for the starter ones, are everyone has 3 months worth of food storage. I used to say 2 weeks, but that's not enough. 3 months of food storage. And this is a goal that I'm still working on as well. We started setting up our food storage, and I was telling my little Freedom Cell, my family and stuff, you got to start buying food. This was in February. You got to get food. There's going to be shortages. It's going to be hard to get food. And then literally within the month, the grocery stores started running out of canned food, and they had long lines out of the grocery store, and you had to stand 6 feet apart, and there's no toilet paper and stuff. And I thought that in February, we'd be stocking up for when crap hits the fan, who knows, 6 months or a year when the economic problems happen. I didn't know literally in 2 weeks to 4 weeks would we be tapping into our canned food reserves already, because we wanted to avoid the headache at the damn grocery stores. And thank God I bought bulk toilet paper, because it's all sold out everywhere unless you want to wipe your butt with paper, cardboard paper. That's basically the crappy toilet paper left over. So that's one goal, 3 months food storage. The second goal is to make sure everyone can communicate, preferably on an encrypted channel like Telegram. Or if you're in the same geographic area, like CB radios or Marine Band or shortwave radio, stuff like that, which I think they're trying to outlaw shortwave radio in California. So get the hell out of there. So food, communication, Telegram's a great channel. It could just be a text chat as well. And then make sure everyone has firearms. This, again, if not everyone's into firearms, that's okay. This isn't a requirement. This is just what I want to associate with. And I think firearms are very beneficial. It's better to have a gun and not need it than to need a gun and not have it. So everyone has a firearm. And then the benefit of the Freedom Cell, even with the group of 64, but just with 8, is you're like, hey, well, these 2 guys already have 9mm as their caliber. This guy has 9mm as well. So let's all buy 9mm guns for the other 3 people that don't have any guns. Then we can all chip in and get bulk ammunition. You can even extend that out when you have 64 people. You link up with the local gun store and you're like, hey, we want to go in on your next big buy so you can get a better price. We can all get a better price, whatever. And then the 4th one is everyone has a bug out plan. And it doesn't have to go to the same place, although it can. Maybe one of the members of the group of 8 has a nice 2-acre plot with a garden, and the other guys live in the city or the suburbs. But it's like everyone makes sure that we have that plan and we hold each other accountable to make sure that the plan's in place and everything's working together. And those are 4 good goals for survival and preparedness. But you can have a Freedom Cell of parents, and the goal, like a homeschooling Freedom Cell. Oh my God, the kids are going to have to wear their masks. Already, if you're a libertarian or voluntarist, you shouldn't want to have your kids in the public school, but that's not always feasible. But when you have 8 people, it becomes more feasible. And the goals are on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, these 2 parents are going to oversee the education and help facilitate activities for the children. On Wednesday or on Tuesday and Thursday, these 2 parents are going to oversee the activities. Once a week, we're going to get together to go to a museum or to the park or go exploring at the state park or whatever. And then another goal is we're going to get together once a week for support, where we all have coffee or we go on Zoom and we talk about our kids. Maybe one kid's like hyperactive and we share strategies on how to deal with that, so on and so forth. You can have an entrepreneurial Freedom Cell, and that does a lot of stuff I imagine y'all are doing with autonomy, like a mastermind type group. You can have a spiritual development Freedom Cell where you get together and do yoga and meditate together. You are accountability partners. Maybe one of the people in the group is trying to quit drinking. You check in with your group, or if they have an urge to drink, they call their group of 8. So it doesn't just have to be about opting out and creating a free society. They can be these all functional Freedom Cells that don't have to be in the same geographic area with multiple goals. And I think that's really, it's just the value of small groups. It doesn't have to be called a Freedom Cell. It's just the benefit of having a small group of human beings working together. But the real magic comes when you have a small group of human beings linked up with other small groups of human beings. And then you have a big giant group comprised of small autonomous groups where each individual is autonomous as well. And then I've come up with this whole consensus-based mechanism for making decisions that really could replace this bullshit democracy and state, local, federal government infrastructure we have now. It could be totally consensus where no one is coerced. No one has to go along. If the whole group of 8 doesn't have consensus on participating in the health share, for example, then, or maybe 2 people in this group of 8 don't want to participate, the other 6 do, well, then that whole Freedom Cell doesn't participate. It goes out. Or maybe those 2 people don't join, they're out of that Freedom Cell that wants to do it. Those 6 people join with another one, but you can make decisions in a way where unless there's consensus, you don't move forward. But the network outside of the people that have consensus can move forward in some ways, but whatever. That's big thing.
Exactly. The whole point is to be less dependent on the outside, on the state, and the more independent, the more plugs we can cut, the better. In every aspect. 3 thoughts. You mentioned maps are also physical maps. You know, you want to be able to know where you've got to go visit your friends without using your GPS, because let's face it, I mean, I know there's going to come a time when I'm going to have to give up my cell phone. And also you can be part of several cells. I mean, there are cells within cells. You can be part of multiple cells. That's quite common, isn't it, John?
Yeah, you can have multiple cells. You could, like, I have this cell that has my parents, and then I want to build another cell that's more, fellow activist friends as well. And then I could have a parenting cell or whatever. The way Bob Podolsky has this structure for his holomat, never mentioned why group of 8 is beneficial. This guy, John David Garcia, did a lot of research, and he found that 8 people creates the most optimal creativity. And his ethic wasn't liberty or freedom. This guy, John David Garcia, a lot of prolific work. I really want to read his books on creativity and social organization and creating alternative institutions, alternative forms of social organization. but he found that a group of 4 men and 4 women would create it would have the most creativity with the least amount of friction. And then, if you have 4 people, there's not enough ideas, there's not enough people to get stuff done. If you have 12 or 15 people, maybe there's too many people and there's not enough group cohesion. There's like all these, it's hard to be on the same page. So if you like your group grows to 14, then you could split off into 2 groups of 7. You can still be together in the middle cadre, but you split off into groups of 7. That's what this guy, Nick Ludwig, did when their Ron Paul meetup grew to like 100 people in St. Paul and Minneapolis. They split it up into 2 groups of 50. And it was easier to keep things going and for the meeting to have more purpose, so on and so forth. And so Bob Podolsky has octalogs, which is 8 people, and they have a form of communication that he calls soul bonding. And there's another name that he has for it, amplification. And it's like it's a mechanism for decision making and problem solving, which he's a psychotherapist, and he really does a lot of work on childhood trauma. And he points out that a lot of people aren't even capable of receiving feedback without getting defensive, and that causes problems, right? So he has this mechanism called amplification and soul bonding, and your group of 8 engages in this mechanism. And so instead of a dialogue, it's an octalog with 8, right? But he has this really cool picture, maybe you can link to it, of the Holomat organization. There's all these groups of 8, and each time an octagon touches, there's an ethical contract amongst those groups. But he has the groups of 8 and the octalogs that have a function like law and food production and defense and so on and so forth. So we're in the very beginning stages of this, and I don't want it to be like John Bush has this idea of how it should be, or Bob Podolsky has this idea of how it should be, and it's got to be this way. I want it to be like, these are some foundational ideas. Let's take them and run with them and let people innovate and form it up and make it look however it needs to look, right? Because I don't know what the best way to form an alternative social organization, an anarchist society, is from the ground up. I have some ideas that I'd like to share with people, but maybe some people do it better. Then if we can all be open, the entire organization as a whole can act as a mechanism for feedback, to where in some realities our group all being on the same page has its own consciousness, right? I'm as a libertarian early on, I was all about rugged individualism, right? And collectivism bad. But I think when it comes to politics and politically, individualism good, avoid collectivism. But from a spiritual level and just being around with our other human beings, I do think that there is this element of higher consciousness. And whenever we're all energy vibrating, right? And so whenever we vibrate on the same frequency, maybe it's voluntarism, maybe it's a common goal, then there creates this external, like a group consciousness, so to speak. And so we can all operate as a group consciousness that provides feedback to the whole. And I didn't come up with cells in the beginning for this purpose, but a lot of people are like, sounds like a jail cell, man, or sounds like a terror cell. And then other people are like, no, it's like a cell in the body where there's individual cells that all work together to benefit the whole human. And I really like that analogy. And so we can have all these different cells communicating, sharing energy, sharing information, and it'll benefit the whole whenever we work together. And as long as no one, like, there's no big ego that's like, no, it's got to be this way. If everyone's like, well, I think this works the best, and this other group's like, well, we tried that, but it ended up falling apart. And then the other people are like, all right, well, what did you learn from that? And then we all communicate together.
Collective individualism, decentralizing together.
There you go. Yeah, man. There's a synergy there.
I will definitely link. There'll be a lot of show notes for this conversation. For anyone listening, can go straight to it. I have seen the chart you were referencing before. I probably have it bookmarked somewhere, but either way, there's going to be a lot of links here. I appreciate you coming on today. Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
I won't go on for another 10 minutes. No, freedomcells.org. Join the Telegram groups. And if anybody wants to try Kratom or check out our previous video, that's my business. It helps to fund my life and help keep me being able to focus on other cool stuff too. You can try a free ounce of Kratom. It's a member of the coffee family. Red varieties are good for pain, relaxation, sleep. Green and white varieties are good for stress and anxiety, energy and focus. A lot of people use it instead of prescription pain medicine, whether it's prescription opioids. And then people use it instead of Adderall, instead of depression medicine. It's really a big punch in the stomach to big pharma. So people can try a free ounce of Kratom at freeounceofkratom.com. freeounceofkratom.com if you want to give that a try, natural, and you'll help support me. And then definitely go to freedomcells.org. Make sure you register on our little social network and get tapped into over 2,000 like-minded people that are tired of complaining and are building the free society that we all deserve as free, sovereign human beings.
Excellent, John. And I'll add to that, on the front of truthconduit.com, I do have a banner of Brave Botanicals. So if anyone wants, it's right there on my front page. You just click on it and it'll take you to your website. I've had it up for some time since our last conversation. Well,
Nice.
Cool, John. Thank you very much, sir.
Walking down the street where children play. For them it's just another day. The future's reflected in their parents' faces, who chose to stay on in this place where they were born, went to school, got married, had kids, like their grandparents before them did. Got to escape, before it's too late. Although today I could say that I really will miss the when Santa. Well, yeah, I was right. Knew what it was like when Santa.
You've been listening to truthconduit.com with Chris McMillan. Go to the subscribe page and sign up to get notifications of the latest posts. And check out the support page to help keep it going.
Yeah, I've got a friend in Jesus Christ. I've got a friend in Jesus Christ, and Krishna and Buddha and my bartender.